Donald J. Trump is facing one of the biggest tests of his presidency. Despite positioning himself as the anti-war guy during the election campaign, he has, less than 6 months into his second term, allowed Israel to break a ceasefire in Gaza and carry on its daily massacres of the Palestinians, bombed the Houthis in Yemen, and, of course, last weekend bombed Iran in violation of both the US Constitution and the UN Charter. Trump now claims to have secured a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Let's see how long that lasts. And insists, in defiance of his own government's intelligence assessments, that his strikes successfully destroyed all of Iran's nuclear program and sites. Some, even on the MAGA right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie and Tucker Carlson, have been very critical of these US attacks on Iran. While libertarian comedian and Israel critic Dave Smith, who you may have seen going viral with his debates against Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan or Konstantin Kisin on Piers Morgan, Dave Smith, a former Trump 2024 voter, now says Donald Trump should be impeached over those attacks. And he joins me now. Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
What's up, Mehdi? Thank you very much for having me.
What's up is that Donald Trump bombed Iran, which you and I did not want him to do from different kind of angles, perspectives. You wrote on Twitter, Donald Trump has now launched an illegal war of aggression against Iran. The risk of an absolute catastrophe is very high and the benefits are non-existent. Worst of all, he did it on behalf of a foreign government against a country who posed no threat to us. Do you think Donald Trump is ultimately doing Benjamin Netanyahu's bidding? Was he pressured into striking Iran?
Well, I think that's undeniable, right? That there were certainly pressures, and this clearly has been, as you know about as well as anyone, this has been a goal of the Likudniks and the neoconservatives for many years. That being said, I think Donald Trump also has some horrible priors about the situation, and so I don't know exactly how much pressure was even needed to be placed on him. I mean, Donald Trump has been awful on Israel, on Iran, on the Palestinian question, on basically everything in the region. He was better, at least his gut instinct, on Syria and Iraq than, say, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. But he's always been really bad on this issue. So I think that whether Donald Trump was pulled into this, I'm not sure how much pressure had to be placed on him, but the end result is that, yes, he did Netanyahu's bidding by launching this war, and now at least seems to be advocating something better than he was a few days ago.
Just before we continue, there's been a lot of revisionism on Donald Trump and Iraq. Donald Trump supported the invasion of Iraq. That is well documented. I know he's now spent the last decade pretending he was opposed to Iraq, but that's not the case.
Or Iraq, sure.
In terms of the pressure issue, and Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the ADL, has a piece in the New York Post today suggesting those of us who say that he's doing the bidding of Israel or helping Israel, we're anti-Semitic for suggesting such a thing, which is obviously ridiculous. But put that to one side. There is a fair point, which is if you blame Israel for everything, Donald Trump does get off scot-free. And as you just conceded, he has horrible priors. But there are a lot of people, especially on the right, just saying, oh, he's being manipulated or pressured by Netanyahu and removing all agency from Donald Trump. But it's not as if A, the United States government needs an excuse to start new wars in the Middle East. They've been doing it for decades. Or B, Donald Trump needs an excuse to drop bombs on brown folks. Even before Iran, this past weekend, he had bombed the Houthis this year, killed a lot of innocent people in Yemen, which no one really noticed.
Well, yeah, well, I guess me and you certainly noticed it. But yeah, I mean, this is a thing that came up when I was debating Konstantin Kisin, as you mentioned, that he kept saying, he was like, well, you're criticizing Israel for pressuring America into so many of these wars, but that's removing agency from your own political leaders or something. But that's just not true. I can be mad at all of them for it. You know, if I'm criticizing, say, like a weapons company for funding a think tank that lobbies for more war, as they do all the time, that doesn't mean I'm letting George W. Bush or Barack Obama off the hook. I can still hold them criminally responsible for the wars that they've launched, and Donald Trump as well. And so, again, it's all of these forces are true. And as you know very well, there have been wars that America has fought that weren't at the behest of Israel. Afghanistan wasn't at the behest of Israel. Yep. And the horrific war in Yemen that the Saudis launched against Yemen was about relations with Saudi Arabia and not about relations with Israel. That being said, when it comes to overthrowing Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and Bashar al-Assad and the mullahs in Iran, this has obviously been an Israeli project to get America into these wars. And again, when me and you talk about this, it's not like I'm claiming that there's some secret conspiracy. I'm saying read their own words. That's all I've got here.
It's out in the open.
It's funny.
It's out in the open. The Project for New American Century, the clean break.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, like people like you know, all the hawks will say, oh, you're taking Qatari talking points, or you're standing up for the Iranian government, or you're pro-Palestinian. I have not relied on one source from Qatar or Iran or even the Palestinians. I mean, I've talked to some Palestinians, but the sources that I use are always what the neocons and the Israelis have said themselves, their own admissions. And so this is clearly a regime change they want. But right now, still, Mark Levin is out screaming about how we haven't finished the job. They wanted a regime change war here.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to Zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism. You mentioned George Bush, and Iraq was a regime change war. A lot of critics on the left and right are comparing Trump's strikes on Iran to Bush's war on Iraq. You wrote on Twitter, the Iranian nuclear threat is a complete hoax. It's Saddam's WMDs all over again. I would argue, Dave, that it's worse than Bush and Saddam's WMDs, because at least, and I'm going to have to take a shower after saying this, at least in 2002, 2003, Bush and Cheney went to Congress. They got a vote in support of it. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, they voted for the war. At least they tried to make a case based on intelligence, even though it was manipulated, politicized, exaggerated intelligence. This time around, no vote in Congress, no briefing of Congress, and Trump says he doesn't care about the intelligence assessment from his own director of national intelligence. Marco Rubio went on the Sunday shows and said the intelligence is, quote, irrelevant.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I can't argue with you on that. It's like, not only is it look, obviously the war itself in Iraq turned into a catastrophe where 1 million people died. And so this 12-day war, as it's been dubbed, if it is over, which we really do not know at this point, but okay, it has not killed that many innocent people. But yes, the propaganda push for it, you're right, is even worse. It's even worse than the war in Iraq. And even Benjamin Netanyahu himself, who has a bigger track record of lying about how on the brink the Iranians are of developing a nuclear bomb, he said after the Israeli strikes at the beginning of the 12-day war, with his interview with Brett Baer, even he could only muster saying they're a year away. And like anybody knows, even if Iran, which all the intelligence says has not made the political decision to attempt to achieve a nuclear bomb, they'd have to kick the inspections regime out. It would, even Netanyahu is saying it would be a year, it'd probably be several years before they could have a deliverable nuclear weapon. In other words, Donald Trump has all the time in the world to take this to Congress and let the American system, which is supposed to be the people, get to decide through their representatives whether or not we declare a war. So there was no imminent threat here. It's all made up.
No, definitely not an imminent threat. And Tulsi Gabbard made that clear in her testimony in March. She then came out and said, no, you're misrepresenting me, sharing a video in which we were quoting her completely accurately, in which she said Iran has not built a nuclear weapon, has not made a decision to build a nuclear weapon. She then said, no, they're actually weeks away, which even Benjamin Netanyahu has not said. Now, we can say that's a desperate attempt to stay in the cabinet and not be fired by Donald Trump. But what do you make of people? I mean, you're someone who has, I think, spent a lot of time praising, I don't know what to call these people, alternative voices, like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and all of those lights who spent the last few years going on about regime change wars. We're against regime change wars in Syria and Ukraine. I mean, these people have been hardline against everything. Like, I'm not against all American funding to Ukraine. I would like the Ukraine war to end, but I'm not somebody who thinks we should give nothing to it. These people were like really, really anti-everything. And as someone joked on Twitter, Tulsi Gabbard now has the power for the first time in her life to try and stop a war, and she didn't use it. In fact, she helped make the case for it. RFK Jr., busy, destroying our credibility on the international stage, on the health front, has said nothing about the fact that he's in a government which which bombed Iran. You would think if he was a private citizen, he'd be speaking out against it. Like, where are all these supposedly anti-war alternative voices right now?
Well, I mean, you know, give RFK a break. He's got to deal with the health crisis of anti-Semitism here at home. So that's a big issue when you're on the head of HHS. No, well, look, I mean, the way I look at things is that I'm not in the business of politics. Like, I'm not in the business of wielding power. I'm in the business of spreading ideas and talking about these things. And so I tend to kind of take people at their word. If I feel like they're bringing light to important issues, I give them credit for that and give them praise for that. But again, look, I don't know what the calculations being made are. I could speculate on them. But maybe Tulsi Gabbard is playing some Machiavellian game where she feels like she had to say that in order to stay close to power, and then maybe she could have a positive influence later. I mean, I don't know.
For a second.
No. Well, listen, I'm not saying I believe that either, or much more likely she's just selling out, or she's had pressure put on her or something. But the point is that my job is to just tell the truth, just like your job, right? Like, our job is to tell the truth as we see it. So my job is to just I called Tulsi the Colin Powell of this administration.
Good analogy.
The person who privately was against the whole thing, knew what a catastrophe it would be, but still fell in line and went and lied through his teeth and sold the war. And so, look, you could make an argument, right, that Colin Powell is the worst of the George W. Bush cabinet.
I agree.
Because he's the one who knew better and still went and lied. And so, you know, there's no excuse for it.
No, I agree with
that. You know, and so I just see my job as just being like calling it out. This is nonsense. The idea, nobody has ever said they're weeks away. It's totally absurd.
No, I think even Benjamin Netanyahu probably chuckled when he saw that line from Gabbard. It's like, oh, we've gone from months to weeks. Can I take it to days? It's like this weird Dutch auction. You also said on Twitter that if this conflict is truly over, quote, then we flirted with disaster for absolutely no reason. But Trump may have avoided a disaster right now in terms of, like, we've ended it for now. I don't know as at the time of taping this conversation, but it could change at any moment. But big picture, a lot of experts are saying, and common sense tells us, hasn't this just incentivized an Iranian nuclear weapons program that didn't actually exist, per Tulsi Gabbard, but now may exist? Because if you were the Iranians, wouldn't you want one right now, having just been attacked?
Well, we've certainly, if the goal of U.S. foreign policy for the last 30 years was we need to push Iran to develop nuclear weapons, we really couldn't have gone about it any better. Now, you know, I don't like nuclear weapons in general. I don't want to see any more countries get them, but obviously, you know, the dynamic with nuclear weapons is that they come with the ultimate risk. But in the meantime, they can deter a war. And there's a reason why we have not gone to war with North Korea. And we have gone to war with all of these countries in the Middle East who didn't have nuclear weapons. And even, you know, obviously the Gaddafi, the Libya model that the Israeli government can't stop screaming about, you know, is the worst of all of these situations. And so, you know, the truth to me is that I think if we look at what just happened with this war, and I do, look, while I'll bash Donald Trump, I called for his impeachment over launching it, I will also give him credit that he took the off-ramp that the Iranians gave to him, which is like the biggest takeaway to me of this whole thing. It totally destroys the foundational claim that the neoconservatives have been making all these years, which is essentially that. And I think one that is reliant on some anti-Muslim bigotry in there is that the world could stand Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong having nuclear weapons. The world can stand, you know, Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin having nuclear. But these mullahs in Iran, if they get a nuclear weapon, they just don't care about their own survival. They're all a bunch of suicide bombers. And so they'll use it, and they don't care if they know that guarantees their own destruction. That's not what I'm seeing out of any of these conflicts. What I'm seeing is an Iranian government who clearly does not want to fight with the United States of America and does not want their own destruction, as most ruling regimes would rather rule than be destroyed.
He's not just okay with Putin and Kim having nuclear weapons. He loves Putin and Kim. In fact, those are his words. He said, I exchanged love letters with nuclear-armed Kim Jong-un. We've been agreeing a lot for the past 10 minutes, Dave, so let me push back a bit. You said that, you know, I'll give him credit for the off-ramp. But this is the Donald Trump way of doing things. He creates a problem, then offers a solution to it and says, praise me for the solution to the problem I created. I mean, he bombed Iran. The fact that he took an off-ramp from bombing Iran doesn't change the fact that he took the on-ramp to bomb Iran, which is something George Bush didn't do, Barack Obama didn't do, Joe Biden didn't do.
Well, that is a fair point. And look, it's it's kind of like if you get, if you're blackout drunk and you get in your car to go cruise around on the highway and people are saying, hey, this is a really bad idea. When you come home in one piece, that doesn't disprove that it was a really bad idea to do this. But maybe, look, I mean, the way I tend to do it, right, I think my view is that every U.S. president in my lifetime is a war criminal who should be, locked in jail for the rest of their life. I think that, like, say what Barack Obama did in escalating the war in Afghanistan, of launching the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and
drone strikes,
pouring in all the drone campaigns, I think it's horrible. That being said, I still give him credit for the JCPOA. Yes. I think that was a good move.
Agreed.
And I still give him credit for opening up relations with Cuba. I mean, so like I try to say, well, okay, this part I agreed with, this part I thought was horribly wrong. So yes, you're absolutely right. Donald Trump, this is what he does all the time. He walks you up to the cliff and then walks back and then wants credit for walking back from the cliff. So
indeed.
I agree with you.
You've been pretty outspoken against Trump in recent days over Iran. As you say, you've called for his impeachment. But you voted for him as recently as, 8 months ago? When was the election? November 2024. Why did you make that decision, and do you now regret it?
Yeah, I mean, I said the other day that I apologized for voting for him. But, with a lot of these things, I just felt like he's making the worst possible decision right now. I'm going to criticize him in the harshest possible language and try to send as much of a message as I can that even people who did support Donald Trump will turn on him over this. And I was glad to see that many other people who supported Donald Trump also had similar messages. But I think that my calculation is, I've talked about this like extensively on my podcast, but my calculation of supporting Donald Trump, I think is kind of maybe the inverse or somewhat similar to your calculation in voting for Joe Biden or then Kamala Harris. It's like you would agree that they were funding a genocide for the last year plus of their administration. It's just the overall calculation. You think that, well, I think probably one of these two people are going to be president and this one will be preferable to the other one. So this has always been my biggest concern about Donald Trump, though, was some type of war with Iran. So whether I regret the vote, I tend to think like, that was in the past. But at the time, I thought it was the best decision.
Okay.
Looking back at it, who knows?
Putting aside the regrets, and you said you already apologized for it, so in a sense you are regretful. Let's just talk about the calculation you had, because I'm fascinated by Trump voters, and most Trump voters I meet are not as informed as yourself, I think it's fair to say. You're pretty well informed on the foreign policy agenda. We know that Donald Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. You knew that. We know he assassinated top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in 2020. You knew that. Those two decisions are basically why we are where we are now. It's why Iran started enriching at 60%, not the 3.67% they were doing under Barack Obama's JCPOA deal. You went ahead and voted for Donald Trump last year, knowing that he is the guy who tore up the Iran deal. It's not like, this is not 2016. You didn't go in saying, well, maybe Donald Trump might be the guy. He's saying anti-war stuff in Michigan. He's attacking Liz Cheney. Yeah, he sounds like the more anti-war guy. He had a record that you, Dave Smith, were aware of, killing Soleimani, tearing up the nuclear deal. So when he goes and becomes president and strikes Iran, that is on your hands too, right? You should have known that he was going to do that.
Well, I don't really agree with that any more than I think that if Kamala Harris had won and continued the policy, which she certainly would have, of funding Israel's destruction of Gaza, I don't think you would have had blood on your hands necessarily. The truth is that we live in a system where there are two major parties.
But I made it very clear, Dave, to people that I didn't agree with Harris's Gaza policy and that she would be bad on Gaza. You went into Trump.
I was very clear.
No, you suggested Trump would be more anti-war, didn't you? Or am I wrong on that?
No. No, I mean, I always said going in, and I always was very clear on criticizing Trump for leaving the JCPOA and taking out Soleimani. I thought was a horrible decision that could have led to a catastrophe if not for Iranian restraint. But no, I was very clear on that, and I was very clear that the biggest concern with Donald Trump was Iran. I said from the very beginning that was the thing that was going to make me turn on him if he went in that direction. And also, I always knew it was inevitable that Donald Trump would mess up and that I would turn on him and be criticizing him. I wish he hadn't. I will say this. I held out a sliver of hope, and I always portrayed it this way, that because Netanyahu had double-crossed Donald Trump after he gave him everything he wanted in his first term, that maybe Trump would be petty and vindictive enough to not want to give him everything he wanted in his second term. And maybe the fact that there were voices like Tulsi and some of these other people who were a little bit better, maybe we'd see something better. But I always knew that he was going to end up disappointing.
Let's talk about Gaza for a moment. You are Jewish. Sure. You're an outspoken critic of Israel, of Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you believe that what Israel is doing in Gaza right now is a genocide?
Yeah, probably. I think, in terms of international law, the definition of genocide is incredibly vague. The trying to destroy an ethnicity or nationality in part or whole or something like that. Yeah. And for the most part, when I do debates on this subject, I've never really liked to use the word genocide because I just feel like it derails the debate into a debate about semantics.
How would you describe what Israel is doing in Gaza? What words would you use?
Just the horrific and intentional destruction of a people, with the clear aims of ethnic cleansing and annexing land that doesn't justly belong to you. But just inflicting the worst level of human suffering on children by choice, when you don't have to do it. Yeah. So whatever you want to call that, the worst thing in the world is what Israel is doing to Gaza.
Do you believe, and you spend a lot of time in right-wing circles more than I do you believe attitudes on the right towards Israel are changing? Young Republicans, according to some polls, seem to be much less gung-ho and blindly pro-Israeli than older Republicans.
Yeah, I think not only is it changing, but changing in a profoundly rapid, amount of time. And I think that there's the major reason for this, I think, is kind of the same on the left and the right, which is that the Zionists, as you know, because you've worked in these areas more than I have, but in terms of corporate media and the old legacy media, you just can't overstate the amount of control that there is in that environment where very, very few voices can ever dissent. And as you know, because you've done so many of these debates and you're one of the best at kind of breaking the framing, the whole pro-Israel argument always relies on framing tactics. It's always how you frame. And if you present this to the American people, as they always do, with, doesn't Israel have a right to defend itself? Does it, you know what I mean? And then that's the question. It just, but now the whole media and information decentralization that we've seen over the last few years has now allowed it that the critics of Israel have a fighting shot to have their voice heard too. And I think the result from that is that just a lot of people aren't buying the propaganda anymore. It's almost just too ridiculous. What Israel's doing to Gaza is too evil, and America supporting it is so obviously, not only is it not in our interest, it's so clearly against our national interest. Why would we want to continue drumming up hatred in this part of the world? And do we really think we can get away with supporting this without drumming up hatred and having to deal with the consequences of that? So I think that pretty much explains why people are turning against this.
Do you think Donald Trump's relationship with Israel and with Netanyahu, people were talking about a rift, but he just put out a post this week, a long post praising Netanyahu, saying he should be pardoned for his crimes. Do you believe that relationship and the ripple effects, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Iran, is going to be what starts to turn some of that MAGA base against him? Because people are talking about, there's a split in MAGA for the first time. I interviewed Ro Khanna this week, Democrat congressman, said this is the first time you're seeing fissures in the MAGA base. Do you buy that?
Probably not. A lot of that depends on how this actually plays out. But if this was the end of the war and it doesn't turn into a bigger catastrophe immediately than that, probably Donald Trump will be able to keep most of his base together and they'll kind of come back. But that doesn't mean that those people are going to be Israel supporters. And I think the fact that even though, like, the value, I agree with you, that seemed to me to be all for show. You know, what I said on my podcast the other day was like, okay, Donald Trump had one little clip where he talked tough about the Israelis. Let's see if he doesn't continue funding their destruction of Gaza, doesn't continue giving them everything they want. Yeah. That being said, I think it was maybe useful for some Trump supporters to see that who was it that was trying to drag us back into this war? Even when Donald Trump said he wanted a ceasefire, who goes and unloads everything they have on Iran right afterward? So hopefully there's some value in that.
Although I should point out that MAGA voters last week said they were anti-Iran, anti an intervention in Iran. And once Trump did it, polls showed they're supportive of it. So it is a little bit of a cult, as some have warned. I've got to ask you two last questions before I let you go, Dave. About Ted Cruz and about Douglas Murray. First, how much did you enjoy watching Tucker Carlson basically own Ted Cruz in that viral interview of his on Iran and Israel? Seeing Cruz unable to defend both his own ignorance on Iran and his own relationship with AIPAC. Smart guy, Cruz, but couldn't do it.
Well, that was one of the things that was amazing about it. And it kind of reminded me of the Douglas Murray thing in a way where you feel like the Hawks are like, well, we're sending in our best guy now. You know, this is Ted Cruz. He's argued in front of the Supreme Court. His whole thing is that Ted Cruz thing is supposed to be, even though he's the weirdest guy ever, he's super, super smart. And then he comes in and just has nothing. He's got no argument at all. It's like God told me in the Bible, which isn't even accurate. Like, it's a misreading of the Bible. It's on the level of me naming my son Jesus Christ and then telling Christians that the Bible commands you to praise my son as your Lord and Savior. It's totally absurd, but also just it's a totally incoherent and ignorant case. And this is somebody who's, you know, I think it's reasonable to say that of all the people who make public arguments, if you're a sitting senator arguing for a regime change war, you should have the highest onus on you to have the most compelling case. And he's sitting there he has nothing. So I thought it was beautiful. I just loved watching Tucker destroy him.
God told us, and you're obsessed with the Jews, and that was all he had. You recently debated Douglas Murray, as you mentioned, the British neoconservative journalist, Israel supporter, on Joe Rogan's podcast. You guys had this viral exchange in which Murray argued that you really shouldn't express opinions on Israel or the West Bank or Gaza since you've never visited those places. He said that he never comments on countries he's never been to, as a long-standing journalistic principle of his. So were you surprised to see him, Dave, writing a column in the New York Post last week on the topic of Iran, a country he's never been to, urging Donald Trump to attack Iran, a country he's never been to?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it was just too ridiculous. But again, Douglas Murray he knew what he was doing, and this is, as I've seen people do this to you in several debates, and it's particularly with the pro-Israel Zionists, they really love to do this, where you come to debate the issue, and all they want to do is debate you and your character and whether you're a hypocrite. And so every time I'd bring up a point, Douglas Murray would go, oh, look, a libertarian quoting the CIA. So his response would always be to go at me. But of course, if you just think about it, and Joe had asked me not to make it like that type of debate. So I was like, I'm just going to debate the issues while he can keep doing this. But look, Douglas Murray started writing books advocating for wars when he was like a 23-year-old.
He wrote a book about neoconservatism,
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
and then he said to you that you were being anti-Semitic by mentioning the word neoconservative, a topic he wrote an entire book about as a non-Jew.
I know. And then also claimed that I was like slippery and you couldn't pin me down, but yet he can write a book defending neoconservatism. And then when I bring up the word neoconservatism, he's like, whoa, what are we talking about here? Again, I like this. It's also kind of funny how they become the biggest caricature of like a woke leftist, like literally just shutting down an argument by screaming bigotry. The worst caricature of what they accuse the left of being for the last 20 years is what they become immediately when you point out their own track record. But I just kind of thought it was great because it just laid bare, you know, how they've got nothing. They've just got no argument to support any of these wars. And just to add on to the point you made earlier today, that was, to me, one of the things that was worse about all the people who were buying the Iran propaganda. It's like, dude, it's one thing the year after 9/11 when we're America and we haven't, but after 25 years of catastrophe, you're still buying the same claims about the next one. I think a lot of people are waking up to this stuff. And if that debate was like helpful and more people waking up, then I'm glad to have participated in it.
People are becoming woke, you could say. Dave Smith, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mehdi. I appreciate it.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.